Hey folks, GhazzyTV here with a slightly different video than usual. I just finished promoting a stream playing Torchlight 3 and decided to make a review as it seems like the game has been received very differently depending on who you ask, so I wanted to give you my thoughts on it as well. Now, when you first boot up the game, you'll choose between a single player or multiplayer, and then you get to choose between 4 different base classes. That goes from a sharpshooter, who is your classical ranger class, with one skill tree focusing on range abilities and one class focusing on pet summons and scaling their abilities. You also have the Dusk Mage, which was my personal choice, and this class is pretty cool as it focuses on the combination of both light and dark abilities. Instead of just focusing on one of them, you can actually have a combination of both and then have some pretty cool combination in terms of buffs and whatnot for that type of approach. The Forge class is basically the tank choice out of the 4. And this one can focus on either range abilities or being up close fighting in melee style. This is also the class that can do the spin to win strategy with Cyclone ability if that's what you're looking for. The Railmaster is the game's oddball class in my opinion, as it can either be played as your typical berserker upfront melee hitter, or it can be played as a somewhat of a summoner ability kind of approach class where you summon trains. So you're basically a train conductor. And there's some pretty insane train theme skills in that tree as well. So if that's something that would float your boat, go for it. Now each of these classes have 19 different skills in total with their 2 skill trees. And each node has a set of tiers which is with more investment not just increasing the efficiency but also alters the way the abilities work. Everything from an AoE healing ability or buff ability that would then suddenly knock enemies back, to having a projectile based attack that with more investment would gain more projectiles. So there's a lot of different alterations to these abilities as you further progress the skill points in them. Now, besides these base skill trees, you get to choose a relic, and this acts as a 3rd skill tree, and this is something you pick during the character selection or creation, and there are 5 different additional skill trees based on which relic you choose. And these includes both passive and active skills, and it kind of allows for some pretty cool in-depth build designs, and I think this is one of the best things about the in-depth character design that I really enjoyed. I went with a Bane approach, which is focusing on summoning spiders via the focus of poisoning enemies, but it also has the ability to just focus on poison damage output without bothering the minions itself. But as I'm a big fan of summoner plays in most ARPG games, I went with a Bane and I've been focusing on fighting with spiders next to me. But before giving my final verdict on what I want to outline the things I liked as well as the disliked to make it easier for you to decide if you want to try the game or not. Now, I don't want to go too in depth with the progression of the game due to how linear the game is, which I will mention in a bit. I think that the itemizations of the game is pretty cool. It's not super complex, it's very straightforward, where an item drops with some statistics, and then there's going to be some extra fixes and suffixes and whatnot to allow you to get poison on hit, for example, which is what I wanted on my build, to crits and modifiers, to chill and ice damage and whatnot. So it's very straightforward, so I don't want to go too in-depth with it, and I would actually rather see people that play the game enjoy and experience that themselves, because it's rather straightforward and doesn't really require any spoiling, in my opinion. So diving into the dislikes and likes for this game, I want to focus first and most on the things I didn't like. And I'll try to keep these things rather essential to avoid wasting your time. So the bad things about the game were mostly trivial for me, such as not being able to see the numerical value of HP and mana without hovering over the bubbles. Obviously, I think this is something that either will be fixed or adjusted or be modded, which I think is a little bit annoying that it's not part of the core game. So it's slightly tilting, not a big deal, but tilting for me. The fact that you couldn't force left click to move could prove sometimes rather dangerous, because instead of running out of harm's way when you're trying to dodge a boss ability, my character would sometimes instead attack, because where I was moving, there would then be an enemy that I accidentally clicked on, and I would instead start attacking. And this could in many cases cause me to be close to dying. I did do the playthrough without dying so far, so it's actually been rather fun. But that also moves me over to my actual playthrough. I played on the absolute hardest difficulty, And for a first time playing the game, I only had 1 or 2 really close encounters. And if anything, the higher difficulty gave me more loot, but made progression just slower due to sometimes encountering, or quite often encountering, unique and legendary enemy packs that are much tankier. So instead of actually giving me a harder difficulty spike in terms of playthrough, it felt like it just slowed me down but gave me more loot. Now, I enjoyed this fact that I was encountering harder enemies, because I feel that I would have probably gotten a bit bored with just going through, you know, white enemies 24/7 and one-shotting them. So I did enjoy the game either way, but the difficulty itself felt kind of like a whatever kind of decision, as it wasn't really hard. But taking my dislikes aside, it's only fair to look at the things I really enjoyed, and again, I'll focus on the essentials here. Now, the game is as responsive as expected, and the combat feels very smooth, and the enemy abilities are very well telegraphed, as well as avoiding a massive cluster of effects on the screen so that you cannot see anything, which we've seen in other games. This is not the case when it comes to Torchlight 3. So there's a lot of things that are really good in this case, but the combat feeling very smooth if you exclude that you can't do left-click force movement. So that was the only thing that could sometimes make combat feel rather annoying. But everything else about the combat has actually been very, very good. You also have a hideout, or fort, as it's called in Torchlight 3, which is basically your own house. And it's a very nice touch to the game, both for personal storage and other perks. Now, for me personally, I'm not a big fan of the decorative approach to these kind of things in games. I usually, when it comes to the more in-depth kind of games with decorations in your hideout or fort or house, I usually just import for someone else who designed one that's really cool, and I'll take that one. But I look at these things for more for the functionality rather than the decorative approach, because I don't want to spend too much time in my house, or in this case fort. I would rather play the game and fight enemies. But there's some really cool effects you can do here. Anything from getting gear luck increasement, basically magic finding statistics, extra fire resistance, more gold bonuses and whatnot that you're able to achieve. And neither of these things cost you any extra real life money, of course. These are all things built in the game. Something I've always loved about Torchlight is the pet functions, that you're able to have a secondary inventory slot for your pet to carry items for you. The pet fights for you, it can have different abilities, as well as the fact that you can send your pet to town to vendor your items if you just want to get rid of them as you continue playing the game. This allows you to have minimal downtime and only saving the items you don't want to vendor or sell, which I've really enjoyed with this installment, as I have in the previous Torchlight games as well. Now, there are plenty more things to outline that I personally enjoyed, but to avoid wasting your time, like I mentioned before, I'll be focusing on the essentials. And there are a few things I want to mention when it comes to comparing Torchlight 3 with its previous installments. Now, Torchlight 3 is a much more linear game in terms of progression, and much easier to learn and get into, and this makes the game an ideal introduction for someone who isn't familiar with the ARPG genre or haven't bothered trying it before. Now, for the ARPG fans out there like myself, I found myself enjoying the game a lot despite this extremely linear approach. And I believe this stems mostly from the extra skill tree providing your character design a lot more depth than it seemed at first glance, thanks to the relic approach. Since you're able to have 2 different skill trees on your class, there's so many different things you can do already at that point, but then adding this 1 out of 5 different relic skill trees can completely redesign the way you want to play the build. So even if there's only 4 base classes in the game at the current time, I was very happy with the character designing and what I could do with it, even if it's rather linear. So my verdict of this game is very simple. Since the asking price is not too high, I believe it's absolutely worth trying out, and it's a fun game to knock out with your friends. And it's also a perfect game to introduce you to the ARPG genre if you're new to it, or if you want to introduce the genre to a friend. Since a lot of us that has been playing ARPGs for a long time, most of us have grown up playing Diablo 1 or even Diablo 2 for the most part. And then we have the other games like D3, PoE, etc. And a lot of us have also enjoyed Torchlight 2. So when Torchlight 3 comes around, it's a very different take on it, and it's much more introduction or new player friendly, which I think is great, because we don't really have a game like that in the community or in the gaming world at the moment that I would at least argue for. The Torchlight 3 fills that gap. It doesn't really function as a as a continuation or a sequel to Torchlight 2, which I think is what caused a lot of these mixed reviews on. Now, personally, I love Torchlight 2, but I'm also very, very happy with Torchlight 3, and I think it's definitely worth trying out. But hell, I played a lot more hours than I originally signed up to do, which is a good thing in my book. So I think that's really good. And I'll definitely be putting some more hours into this game because I actually really enjoyed it. I want to see what my character can do at the absolute end game play. Anyways, if you try this game out, or if you're about to if you try this game out, or if you're about to, let me know in the comments below what your take is. And don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe for more content. Until next time, as always, stay safe and keep rocking.